is Democracy Now!
I'm Alan Dershowitz, and in my new book, The Case for Israel, I try to make the progressive case for a two-state solution, and I insist that when the Palestinian leadership really wants a Palestinian state more than they want to see the end of the Jewish state of Israel, this century-long conflict, which could have been resolved long ago, will finally be resolved.
Hi, I'm Norm Finkelstein. I read Alan Dershowitz's book twice. I carefully checked the sources, and it's my impression that the book does raise serious questions about his academic integrity, his intellectual honesty, and raises serious questions about whether he's even qualified to teach at Harvard University.
Well, this
Today,
is
a debate.
I appreciate Alan Dershowitz's seriousness, at least in these remarks. I have no intention whatsoever of getting involved in an ad hominem debate with Mr. Dershowitz. I'm interested in the facts. I was asked to come in and discuss his new book. I went home, purchased one copy. In fact, I purchased 2 copies. I read the book very carefully. I did what someone serious does with a book. I read the text. I went through the footnotes. I went through it very carefully. And there's only one conclusion one can reach, having read the book. And this is a scholarly judgment. It's not an ad hominem attack. Mr. Dershowitz has concocted a fraud. In fact, Mr. Dershowitz has concocted a fraud which, amazingly, in large parts, he plagiarized from another fraud. In the first 2 chapters of your book, you extensively reproduce all of Joan Peters' pages in her book. Now, in 1984, one Joan Peters published a book called From Time Immemorial. The book was universally recognized by serious scholars to be a fraud. Without wanting to toot my own horn, I'm widely recognized as the person who exposed the fraud. I know that book inside out. I read it at least 4 times, and I went through all 1,854 footnotes. I started to read your book, Mr. Dershowitz. I then came to chapter 1, footnotes 10, footnote 11, footnote 12, footnote 13, footnote 14, footnote 15, footnote 16. All of the quotes are from Joan Peters. They are so from Joan Peters that you have a long quote here from Mark Twain on pages 23 to 24. I turned to Joan Peters, page 159 to 60. The identical quote from Twain with the ellipses. One last example, and I want to make it very clear. In Joan Peters' book, From Time Immemorial, she coins a phrase. The phrase is turn speak. And she said...
No, she borrows it from...
No,
she borrows
sir,
it from who is
sir,
it?
I'm sorry.
No, she attributes it and borrows it from
Sir,
somebody else.
I'm
It's not her own
sorry.
phrase.
She coins the phrase, you see, you don't know what you're talking about, and that's pretty
It's not her
terrible. She coined the phrase turn speak, and she says she's using it as a play off of George Orwell, which, as all listeners know, used the phrase newspeak.
Right.
And she coined her own phrase, turn speak. You go to Mr. Dershowitz's book, he got so confused in his massive borrowings from Joan Peters that on 2 occasions, I'll cite them for those who have a copy of the book, on page 57 and on page 153, he uses the phrase, quote, George Orwell's turn speak. Turn speak is not Orwell, Mr. Dershowitz. You're the Felix Frankfurter Chair at Harvard.
Yes.
You must know that Orwell would never use such a clunky phrase as turn speak.
I like it. I think it's a very elegant
well,
phrase.
maybe you like it,
I
and
do.
evidently Joan Peters liked it, but George Orwell never heard of it.
We're intrigued on watching Scarborough Country when you debated Sam Husseini, the
Right.
offer that you made.
Right.
We want to just play it for a moment.
Please.
I'll tell you what, I will give $10,000 to the PLO in your name if you can find a historical fact in my book that you can prove to be false. I issue that challenge. I issue it to you. I issue it to the Palestinian Authority. I issue it to Noam Chomsky. I issue it to Edward Said. Every word in my book is accurate, and you can't just simply say it's false without documenting it. Tell me one thing in the book now that is false.
Okay, let's go to the book.
Well, first of all, I want to clarify the monetary issue. Is it now $25,000?
It's $25,000 on that issue.
Oh, just
on
on
the
that
issue.
In general,
right.
it's $10,000.
And let me be very clear what I said.
We heard it. We just saw it on the
But
tape.
let me be very clear.
I think it's clear.
I then made it very clear. I said afterward, a material, willful distortion of fact.
Professor Dershowitz, it's on tape. We just saw it.
But we're not talking about a spelling mistake.
Oh, no, I'm not
we're not talking about a minor mistake in a footnote. We're talking about a serious material, willful mistake of fact that I deliberately engaged in.
Serious material facts.
Right.
Let's start. Number one, I'm going to first deal with just concrete facts which are not particularly controversial, which can easily be confirmed. On page 80 of your book, you write that according to Benny Morris, between April and June...
Benny Morris being an Israeli
historian. I have a copy of his book here, which I'll hold up.
Right.
2,000 to 3,000 Palestinians were made refugees during the second stage of the flight.
Looking at page 256 of Benny Morris's book, Righteous Victims, A History of the Zionist-Arab Conflict.
He's referring to phase 2 now, the same one as you. Go ahead.
And you're talking about right over here.
Altogether, yeah.
Altogether, about 200,000 to 300,000 Arabs fled their homes during the second stage of the Exodus.
There's a big difference between 2 and 3,000 and 2 and 300,000. Now, you could check this many times, Mr. Dershowitz, but you're really going to have to pay the $10,000.
No.
And I hope you allow me to I hope you allow me to earmark it for Jenin.
Have laid out a challenge, Professor Dershowitz, on Scarborough Country, the program on MSNBC. You said if anyone can find a factual error in the book, we're not talking spelling errors, that you will give $10,000. Sorry?
Yes, as I said, I'm prepared to do that. Now,
okay, now I'm going to interrupt.
Right.
This is a major challenge.
It is.
You've put it out on television. Norman Finkelstein, you have laid out one error. Whoever's interested served. Who's ever interested served. You did respond.
No.
You said 2,000 to 3,000, quoting Benny, citing Benny Morris, the Israeli historian. In fact, he said 200,000 to 300,000 Arabs. Now,